Is this art? Duh, Pia. Of course it is, you're probably saying. Well, what about this? Or this? Now you're a little less sure, right? Okay. One last time. What about this? I assume here I'm starting to lose some of you in the crowd, but I'm a big defender of pieces like this. Let me tell you why. Hey, howdy, hi. My name is Onomatopoeia, and honestly, I'm freaking out. If you're living in the world right now, America has a problem. Whether it's because you were our ally and you were left high and dry for our enemies to lovers plotline with Russia, or you're a citizen here rapidly losing your rights, I think we can all agree. What the f is going on? The demential riddled orange is doing everything in his power to bring back loud and proud, full-fledged fascism to the United States. And everyone is talking about it. And with the takeover of the Kennedy Center and the Smithsonian, I'm starting to see some red flags that look a little too similar to these kinds of red flags. Before I talk about 2025's America and its relationship to the arts, I'd like to briefly discuss a different nation, Germany, in the 1930s. Now, we all know who was in charge of Germany in that time period, and I'm sure that you'll remember that he was denied admission to art school. Maybe you, like me, can understand a little bit why. His work is a little derivative, and he has an okay understanding of light, etc., etc., and, he could do a pretty mean landscape, but that's about it. But anyway, you're not here for an art critique of his work, but did you know about
Die Ausstellung Antarktische Kunst.
or for us non-German speakers, which, sorry, I probably butchered that even with all of your help, the Degenerate Art exhibition? In 1933, Hitler was very obsessed with cleansing the culture of degeneracy. We often think of this as book burning / banning, replacing officials with unqualified yes men, and the erasure of communities in science. Wait a minute, hold on. Let me try that again. That was the wrong guy. We often think of this as book burning / banning, replacing qualified officials with unqualified yes men, and the erasure of communities and science. But a less well-known arm of this were two art exhibitions. The first of which I can assume you've gathered. In contrast with the Degenerate Art exhibition, there was the Great German Art Exhibition. But more on that later. Now, to say they were Hitler's exhibitions is a bit of a stretch, as he didn't personally curate any of the 650 plus confiscated works that ended up in the Degenerate Art exhibition. He left that up to his favorite, and who would become the foremost official painter of the Third Reich, Adolf Ziegler. These exhibitions were meant to be informative for Germans living under the Nazi Party. They outlined what good and bad art was in this new society. Good art in this society was less defined by technique and more by subject matter. The Nazis, quote, rejected the modernism of the early 20th century in favor of more traditional and more simple artistic styles that supposedly reflected Nazi values in some way. But these requirements were unclear and inconsistent. In the early years of the exhibition, Nazi policies on art had not been fully defined, and it was not clear what styles or subjects would be accepted or rejected. Some works reflected political themes, but others included scenes of warfare from World War I, statues reflecting Greek and Roman styles, landscapes, or portraits of German workers and farmers. And degenerate art was anything that, this is a direct quote from Hitler himself here, insult German feeling, or destroy or confuse natural form, or simply reveal an absence of adequate manual and artistic skill. Which is also very broad and subjective, so it can be applied to virtually anything, which did actually end up creating some disputes within the Nazi Party. But the overall messaging was that modern artists were bad. Opposed modernist art on two grounds. First, he believed that it was cosmopolitan rather than nationalistic. Second, he erroneously maintained that it was overly influenced by the Jews. I'm sure you can see the problem with one man defining what is good art socially, but if he can't define that, who does? Well, typically it's art critics, historians, artists themselves, and you, or society at large. Not one guy who couldn't cut it and all of his cronies. In late stage capitalist America, we have our own definitions and categories we use when judging a piece or artist's merit. The two main categories that art experienced in America fall into are art for art's sake and art as capital. Art for art's sake is an art history term that I've kind of appropriated here, but because I believe the definition has changed as our society has. Originally, lau palau, this French term expresses that art has inherent value independent of its depiction, or social, political, or ethical meaning. It should purely be judged on its aesthetic merit, and its success of formal qualities like line, color, texture, etc. The last part of this I tend to drop from my definition, not because abstract expressionism doesn't excel in these qualities, but because movements like this kind of ignore that in favor of freer expression for the most part. But at the time, art for art's sake was revolutionary. See, most art post-Renaissance was represented by academic paintings, which favored telling historical or mythical stories that had a clear and strong ethical message or religious meaning, which was often connected to state power or church power, of course. Art for art's sake, however, was often implicitly radical, and its program of seeking scandal informed the more politically charged activities of subsequent movements. Movements like Dada, which is one of my favorite art movements of all time. If you know me, you know I can't help but bring up Dada in every single one of my videos. I promise, a deep dive on that is coming soon. I love Dada so much. The ready-mades, chaotic collages, hella onomatopoeias, and the overall kookiness are just so amazing, especially because most of these were anti-bourgeoisie, anti-war protest pieces. And I'm bringing up Dada here specifically not just because I love this movement, but because this was a big part of those 650 confiscated pieces that I was talking about earlier, so just keep that in mind. What I'm getting at here is that art for art's sake allowed for abstract expressionism, cubism, pointillism, and ready-mades to be considered as art. Not even good art or art that has an immense value, just art, period. Which is massive for the art world. Without this, there's no Kandinsky, there's no Pollock, and there's no Picasso. Conversely, you have art as capital, which takes a few more words to define and is honestly almost a broader range of art and medium than art for art's sake, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Art as capital is art that is created by a select few artists that exists to benefit a capitalist state, organization, or individual, glorifies the economic theory, or benefits the collector through monetary gain. Think about things like corporate graphic design, NFTs, AI art, and pieces most likely only made to launder money. I'm looking at you, Banksy. Now, this is also different than art merely existing and operating in a capitalist society. Pollock, for example, was an American abstract expressionist, yet I wouldn't put his art into this category, especially considering that man's political views. Unlike art for art's sake, there isn't necessarily a visual element linking pieces in this movement. It's more about what the art can do for an individual or state. What tends to link art in this category is the type of viewer it attracts. facts. If you've spent any time on social media and your algorithm thinks you'd like art, which is probably all of you here now, I bet you've seen a video like this. If I was the first person to subject you to that, I sincerely apologize. But now you've basically seen all of them. They all follow these same beats. Cherry-picked examples of what the creator will call modern art, which it's not, considering that modern art ended in the 1970s, which would make it contemporary art, but that's besides the point. Anyway, this is typically juxtaposed with what the creator will call the correct way to create art, or with complaints about how art just used to be better. Interestingly, to me at least, the people who make these videos tend to stem from the same political sphere, the right wing. When I first saw this phenomena, I was shocked. A lot of people I've talked to outside of the art world don't really care for much contemporary work, regardless of their political affiliation. So why am I so willing to slap the label of right wing on this type of hate for the arts? Well, I'd like to address the elephant in the room, and his name is fascism.
Hey Pia, thanks for introducing me, but my preferred name is actually Art Critic. This has been a super fun video to sit in on, but I have some things to say on the matter.
Okay, but I reserve the right to cut you off. This is my video, after all.
Okay, sure you do. Pia, we have a perfectly good reason for setting our standards so high. We just don't like people infiltrating the art world or inflating the price of a work just because it's some pretentious highbrow thing we regular people just wouldn't get.
Right.
And that's all this modern art is. Lazy people who are trying to make a quick buck, scamming innocent viewers, figure skaters, throwing themselves on the ice and demanding a first place trophy. That's why I, Mr. Art Critic Elephant, deem these as more acceptable. They follow my rules for good art.
And what exactly are those rules?
Well, for starters, we like art to be representational, but that's not enough. It should also utilize Western beauty standards, Academy's requirements of art, like what subject matter and techniques are allowed, and it would be nice if the art promoted biblical values and stories.
Oh boy, I'm starting to see some problems here.
Well, Pia, I'm a donkey, and I actually kind of agree with the elephant on this one.
What? But dear viewer, please tell me you at least understand what I'm trying to say here. At least you get me. But for the sake of these poor animals, let's look at the requirements these two just described for art and compare them to the requirements for the Great German Exhibition that I discussed briefly earlier. In 1930s Germany, art was often defined by sentiment like modern art is bad because it's not representational. They preferred representations of the quote-unquote pure race and nationalistic pieces. They started with censorship and complaints, and then eventually moved into full-fledged removal and eventually even destruction of a lot of works. Artists of controversial works were also forbidden from buying materials and could be subjected to public intimidation. And the regime in the 1930s often did not allow for art that critiqued the state or regime. And they described avant-garde modernism as sick and degraded. 2020's American art is often defined by sentiments like, that looks so easy, I could do it. We tend to prefer nationalistic art in America, and we're currently in the censorship, complaints, and removal era. We see this with things like art being deemed as too woke, or claiming museums depicting accurate history promote narratives that deem the US harmful and oppressive. We see people advocating for going back to the 16th through 19th century, when academies ruled over art, creating approved subject matters and deeming who was and wasn't an artist. We also see a lot of sentiment getting popular, like vulgar art is bad in all cases, pornographic art is bad in all cases, and art they can't understand is bad, as well as performance pieces being objectively bad. Whoa. Now, those look incredibly similar to me. But Pia, you just made those talking points and the elephant up. That's not enough to condemn real people to the label of fascism. At least not yet. Okay, fair. But let me show you what does, though. Let's look at how Hitler and others like him have controlled freedom of expression in their museums and art centers, and compare that to what's happening in America currently. In the 1930s, after a period of radical change and progress in and outside of the art world, Hitler and his armies regressed their artistic society, rounding up art pieces hung in museums that didn't fit his requirements. He shut down and defunded museums and gloated to his supporters about these accomplishments. While Hitler was working on his degenerate exhibitions, Stalin created socialist realism, a state-sanctioned artistic style meant to uphold the values of Stalin's specific brand of communism and his party. He utilized this art, like the others in this section and the main man we're talking about here, to spark his fatherly cult of personality. Stalin and a top Marxist thinker, Maxim Gorky, believed that art should be realistic, possessing a true-to-life visual style. Art should be relevant to the workers and understandable to them. It should present scenes of everyday life. Its representations should be realistic, and it should be partisan and supportive of the aims of the state and party. Gorky proclaimed that art that portrayed a negative view of the state of the party was to be illegal. In this manner, Stalin and Gorky had effectively mobilized Soviet art as a form of state propaganda, which, interestingly for our conversation at hand, was a big factor in the Cold War. The CIA in America actually inflated a lot of abstract expressionism to show how free of a country we were in contrast to Russia's controlled market. How far we have fallen. Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, and to a lesser extent today, Kim Jong-un, utilized their film industry to heavily spread propaganda across North Korea. Remarkably successful, mostly because of their ban on outside media, these films did more than just show an idealized, propagandized version of North Korea. They also showcased the degeneracy of their enemies. America, China, South Korea, and Japan were depicted as harmful tyrants who would listen to ABBA. Yeah, ABBA is the peak of degenerate music, apparently. They would kidnap, torture, and even kill North Korean citizens, while North Korea was depicted as a beautiful, dutiful nation and people, often through movies about the Korean War or traditional stories. Often, at the end of these, a Kim would appear and do something dubiously godlike. You know, maybe he would save a whole infantry of North Korean soldiers, or maybe the last shot of the movie would end on the sun. You know, Kim Il-sung? Sun? Huh? These shots of the sun were meant to represent their kind-hearted, generous leaders. Leaders who wouldn't allow any outside media in their state, even though they consumed it. Leaders who kidnapped South Korean directors when their movies were no longer hits. Who would control their actors and directors' off-screen garb as well as their on-screen clothing. If you want to watch a fantastic video on North Korean media over the years, I highly suggest you check out Paper Will. He did a huge deep dive on North Korean media, and it was so fascinating. He's so good at setting up a narrative, and he goes much more in depth than I have time for here, considering, that's a 5.5 hour nuanced approach to the topic. And at this point, you really should consider watching that. Those 100% tariffs on movies made outside of the United States are another vague law that aims, at least for now, to bring movie production back to the backlots of LA. But this is clearly a slippery slope into widespread control over what movies are allowed to be shown in the US. This order is going to make movies more expensive, take longer to film, and will open movies up to scrutiny from the Donald, who can determine them pro-America or anti-America. No one in the movie industry really knows what this means yet, though. One thing I know for sure is, like every other tariff in our country, this will make an already expensive movie ticket increase. Movies becoming more expensive to make will only be shuttered onto consumers as more and more of the cost of expensive CGI remakes already has. And more vague language in Truth Social rants like these only allows for more of his and his team's control in our creative industries. Well, Donald Trump has yet to round up pieces he doesn't like and destroy them, except for maybe that portrait made by a supporter in Colorado. He has, however, targeted individual museums and art centers as being too woke, telling Vice President J.D. Vance, a new board member at the Smithsonian, to remove all of the improper ideology and anti-American sentiment that divides Americans by race from the Smithsonian Museum, specifically bringing up changes made after the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests and DEI policies in the institution. The White House has deemed his efforts as restoring truth and sanity to American history, claiming that the Smithsonian promotes narratives that portray American and Western values as inherently harmful and oppressive. These narratives the Trump admin is referring to do refer to America and its unique set of Western values as harmful and oppressive because they were and are. This country and her laws were written to oppress. The prison industrial complex in America only exists because plantation owners could not give up the concept of owning people. If we choose not to discuss the oppression in the Jim Crow era South because it makes white people uncomfortable, we risk continuing and repeating these harmful ideologies, which we already do in this country. And even if we had escaped these harmful values in 2025, advocating for their removal is only going to make things worse. We already have the Klan running around. We don't need their membership to skyrocket. They already see a huge boost in members each time he's elected. Policies like these are created to aid and abet white supremacy in the United States. I mean, he's literally calling for the return of monuments built to enshrine and adore slave owners and white nationalists. But Trump doesn't just want a wider United States. He wants a straighter one too. And he's going to get that, wait a minute, through musical theater. Although the president has bragged about never attending a performance at the Kennedy Center, he ousted 18 of their democratically appointed board members and filled it with his yes men, including electing himself through his new appointees, like Usha Vance, as the chairman of the Performing Arts Center. In the months since his appointment, he's made it clear he doesn't really know what he's doing or even how the Kennedy Center functions. Life at the center has been a tumultuous freefall ever since, with a series of cancellations and missed deadlines. The second week of March, when the Kennedy Center typically announces its programming for the next season, has come and gone. Across Washington, venues like the Anthem and Shakespeare Theater Company are fielding calls from artists and organizations looking for somewhere else to perform. The Trump vision for the center includes shows like Cats, Fiddler on the Roof, and even The Phantom of the Opera, which will be tricky considering that The Phantom of the Opera is the only one of these shows conducting a North American tour in 2025. As a casual theater kid, the picks here interest me a bit too. These are all shows that I saw as a kid. They're easily digestible and, quite frankly, pretty G-rated. Not super highbrow. And it's not like the Kennedy Center itself can put on any of these shows without violating labor contracts and or paying the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees a hefty sum. Another tricky thing to manage, especially when Lin-Manuel Miranda cancels Hamilton's 2-month-long run at the center, taking their most anticipated show of the season, aka their most dollars of the season. I don't imagine Trump is too bummed about the very inclusive retelling of America's birth leaving, though. But I don't know how he'll do the renovations he's dreaming of without that cash. Unless conservative voters become okay with government spending in the arts all of a sudden. These plans are deeply concerning to the Kennedy Center's former president, Deborah Rutter, who told NPR, "The goal of the Kennedy Center has been to live up to our namesake, serving as a beacon for the world and ensuring our work reflects America. I depart my position proud of all we've accomplished to meet that ambition. From the art on our stages to the students we have impacted in classrooms across America, everything we have done at the Kennedy Center has been about uplifting the human spirit and service of strengthening the culture of our great nation. I have been motivated my whole life by the fundamental values of America: freedom, equality, and a deep belief in the American dream. Core to our American experience is also artistic expression. Artists showcase the range of life's emotions, the loftiest heights of joy and the depths of grievous despair. They hold a mirror up to the world, reflecting who we are and echoing our stories. The work of artists doesn't always make us feel comfortable, but it sheds light on the truth. Much like our democracy itself, artistic expression must be nurtured, fostered, prioritized, and protected. It is not a passive endeavor indeed. There is no clearer sign of American democracy at work than our artists. The work they produce, an audience's unalienable right to actively participate. Initially, I didn't even think he would go this far. One of his defining differences from the mustached German leader of the 1940s is that he wasn't an artist himself. I expected more of this censorship to be on social media and done in much more hushed tones. But I was naive. That's part of why this video has taken me so long. I've been waiting to see what he'll do. And I'm not looking forward to the future of our publicly funded art centers and pieces with this tirade he's on. Alas, we must trudge into the type of works he likes to get a better view of what that future might be. I want to start with the very first piece of art that the Trump admin released to the public, and that is Trump's official presidential portrait. An image that is, in the words of Eric Draper, the most printed, most seen image of the president ever. And this portrait has a rather ominous angle and lighting setup for an official and very widespread image. It's very different from his previous portrait, which had a full smile and it was taken from a more front-facing angle with normal portrait lighting. This image to me is very indicative of the two different approaches that he is taking during these terms. While the first term, yes, was still full of racism and tyrannical attempts at grabbing power, this term is staunchly different. In the time in between, Donald J. Trump has been found guilty on 34 felony accounts, and has even posed for a mugshot, which was one of the most searched photos of all time, and was immediately slapped over merch that sold very well within and outside of his party. It doesn't surprise me that he might be making a reference here again to that shot, maybe even hoping for a bit of a cash infusion. I'm sure he made a lot of money from that first photo. Hey guys, editing PA here. Sorry for the mic change and everything, but I just needed to pop in because a second official portrait from 2025 has hit the tower? Yeah, that's right. Today, June 2nd, Donald Trump released a second official portrait. So there's that. Let's talk about it real quick. The background is a lot darker, ominous. The angle is more from above, more ominous. Third, he looks like he's been like very Photoshop retouched or even possibly retouched with an AI. He looks a lot smoother in this one. The lighting's a lot less intense, and I think that's to mitigate the old accusations that he's not beating. I think it's also to mitigate the ugly accusations that he can't beat and will never beat. But I think the most interesting part is the removal of the American flag, and now, after 2 separate presidential portraits, he's finally in a red tie. Republicans will typically wear a red tie for their party, but in both of his presidential portraits before this, from 2017 and the one earlier this year in 2025, he's wearing a blue tie. So I don't want to say that this is fully because he was wearing a blue tie. It's definitely clearly also got something to do with the lighting on his face and how wrinkled it made him look. He looks a lot smoother in this one. That's something that's super noticeable. So therefore, I'm thinking that they absolutely did that on purpose. Like, that was one of the reasons why he didn't like the portrait. It's very clear to me that this is definitely just Donald Trump throwing a temper tantrum and saying that he didn't look good in the portrait, so he wanted a new one. And maybe it's also because he wasn't wearing his party's colors. I don't know why he would have been wearing a blue tie in 2017 or even in 2025 earlier this year, but now he's finally in a red tie. I think it's also because in the first one he released in 2025, this is very clearly just about like how he feels about looking at his face. He looks a lot balder in the first one they released in 2025. And I think a lot of that is to do with the lighting. But yeah, I think a lot of this new portrait is purely because Mr. President has thrown a temper tantrum about how he looked in the first one. I don't know why it took them so long to redo it, because the first one came out in January and it is now June. But yeah, interesting to say the least. Definitely not what we should be spending our time on. But here's your little deep dive on it. I do think that it is a little problematic that the American flag has been removed for someone who is such a Constitution thumper, quote unquote, and someone who is supposedly so pro-America. I think the ominous black background and removal of the American flag is historically going to speak volumes. I think it currently speaks volumes of how un-American he is in his values and his policies. Yeah. So I think the 3 biggest things of note with this new portrait is he's really freaking smooth, and he's not that smooth, and his eyes aren't that blue. They're more of a blue-green in this one, which is also interesting, the color grading. Anyway, besides the point, the removal of the American flag and the red tie, very symbolic, very interesting. I'll also say that the expression in this one, this new one, is a little bit gentler along with the lighting. So maybe it's a bit of a publicity thing. While we're taking out the American flag because, we're not really representing American values right now, maybe he should look less like a dictator because a bunch of people are calling him a dictator and a bunch of Americans are kind of glomming onto this idea and his approval rating is really low. So maybe if we make him look just a tiny bit kinder while he still looks like he's giving this stern it's a gentle, stern expression. Maybe that'll make people like him more. I don't know what the thought process behind this is, but it is clear that the intention of the expression and the lighting and the portrait taken is a little bit different. I wonder if they felt that the original photographer was too woke and didn't like Trump, so they hired somebody else to do it. I'll be interested to see if JD Vance is going to get another official portrait or if he just gets the one, though. Probably just the one. It's worth mentioning that
from what I could find, he's the only president who has done 2 portraits in the same term. Yes, presidents will most likely retake a portrait for their second term and not use the same one from the first, although some have, like Bill Clinton and maybe even Nixon. But people like Ronald Reagan took 2 separate portraits for each term that they served. But I have not found any evidence of like someone taking 2 different official portraits in the same term. But yeah, that's what I have to say on the new portrait in a unscripted, I saw it on a Ground News post on Instagram. So, yeah. But also, Ground News sponsor me if you want to. Alright, back to regular Pia.
But I think something else in particular is at play here, too. And I think he wants to look like a tough leader that no other country wants to mess around with. He's trying to look intimidating as he drafts policy that restricts rights of those within and outside of the country. My final opinion, which I share with Mr. Draper, is that he looks old and ugly, and the lighting and angle are an attempt to mitigate that. Although, he'll never quite be successful with that. He'll need facial reconstruction first. Or, I guess, his supporters to paint him extremely favorably. Hung in the grand foyer of the White House is another portrait of Trump. This one, however, depicts the moments after Trump was allegedly shot at, when he raised his fist to declare "fight, fight, fight," as the American flag flew in the background. To me, this is another attempt at showing the supposed strength of this regime. Strength that translates to authoritarian, fascistic policies. Strength that, in the face of gun violence, hangs an image imparted by it. The picture is taken far away, so I can't exactly comment on the formal qualities of the painting. However, it is clear it is done in a more painterly style, which is honestly probably done because it's a lot easier to be a little bit more charitable to your depiction of Donald Trump. And shockingly, as of recent, this is the only time I think I've seen the Trump admin refer to this shooting since the debut of the ear bandage. This image is actually hung in one of the most prominent locations of the White House, a place where typically portraits of the most recent American presidents are to be given the most prominent placement in the entrance of the executive mansion, visible to guests during official events. But I doubt he'll put up a portrait of Joe Biden anytime soon. And Trump is no stranger to putting himself on walls he doesn't typically belong on. Like a wall of first ladies, perhaps. This fuck-ass portrait imposes an attempt at the American flag, missing most of its stars and stripes, over Trump's long-lost brother's face? You seriously can't tell me that the artists were looking at him when they tried to render this piece. He hangs, frameless, between Laura Bush and Hillary Clinton's beautiful official First Lady portraits.
He technically now hangs between Laura Bush and Patricia Nixon, as they took the portrait of Hillary Clinton down and replaced it with Patricia's. He's still in between 2 First Ladies, frameless, but yeah, now it is Patricia and Laura instead of Laura and Hillary. Very interesting choice to move Hillary's portrait. I mean, I think we all saw that coming. But Patricia Nixon? Is that really who we want to invoke right now? Okay, I'm just saying, you know. Scandal. That's what that president is known for. But anyway, yeah, now it's technically not between Hillary and Laura, it's between Laura and Patricia, so.
I think the most interesting thing about this one, besides the fact that it looks like it would be hung in a finance crypto bros frat house bedroom, has become the placement. Why did he put it up here? Why isn't it framed? What is even going on? Once again, he has his cocked brow, stern-looking expression on his face. He clearly likes the way this expression looks on his face and the message of strength that he feels he's representing. Much like the others, though, we don't know who painted this, if anyone even did. My partner is very suspicious of this one being AI, which would explain why the flag isn't even really the American flag, and why it doesn't even really look like him, unless he was, like, I don't know, chatified or something. But it's too far away for me to say with any certainty or to be able to, like, put it through one of those AI detectors. What I can say with certainty, though, is that it looks tacky and classless next to two very realistic and classy framed portraits. But, you know, as a White House staffer told the Daily Mail, he technically can hang art wherever he wants. So, I guess they got me there. He is free to make a fool of himself if he so chooses. Guys. I found out what this one is. I was doing some research, reading some of his terrible Truth Social posts, against my will, I'll admit, and I looked to the top left. And there it was, in all of its glory, I guess? It's his Truth Social profile picture. This boosts the probability of it being AI way, way up. But it still could totally be a real painting, I guess, technically. Just a very poor attempt at one. But this makes it 10 times more hilarious that he is putting this up, printing it out, and putting this up next to the First Ladies. And, like, it's just so self-absorbed and cringy to hang something like this up. But clearly that's not what he thinks. I think it is abundantly clear that the president is concerned with presenting himself as a strong, stern, wealthy leader of America. Where we see this the most is in the Oval Office. The portraits on the wall, as well as the gilded additions in decor, show off his tacky approach to opulence and decor. The Oval Office is typically decorated minimally because it's often a place of very somber and difficult discussions, which, in my opinion, is exactly why he's done something like this. It sends a very specific message about our country and our values to the world and their representatives and media outlets. But to fully understand this message, we've got to take a look beyond the blinding golden accents. Whose portraits has he hung? Above the fireplace, where most photo ops in the office are taken, portraits of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Andrew Jackson crowd together, their golden frames almost touching. Now, I'm sure most of us know enough to connect the dots between these four men, so I'll spare you there. I think the most interesting choice out of these men on the wall here is Andrew Jackson, though. Jackson, like the rest of the men on this wall, was of course a brutal slave owner and founding father, but these are actually quite low on the bullet list of controversies of Andrew Jackson's. Jackson lost his first bid for president and blamed a corrupt electoral. Once in office, he replaced about 10% of the federal workforce with loyalists, and it is also said that Jackson is partially responsible for the start of the Civil War. He is, however, absolutely fully responsible for the Trail of Tears and all of the terrible tragedy that happened there, despite a Supreme Court order that ruled against the policy. And finally, he was a populist who gave way to economic unrest and was often called dictatorial. Sound familiar? Yeah, well, he's one of Trump's faves. His other favorite president, Ronald Reagan, also has a portrait hung in the Oval. This one, however, is right next to the presidential desk for optimal eye-gazing. Reagan, or as I like to call him, the harbinger of all evil in the United States. I mean, seriously, if there's a policy or a party movement you're not a fan of, Google who put it into place, and 99.9% of the time, it's Reagan. Student loans, Reagan. Abortion as a policy of debate between parties, Reagan, high fructose corn syrup in all of your food? That's also Ronald Reagan. I could be here all day. Ronald Reagan, of course, is another very famous TV star turned famous right-wing politician, and Trump has been chasing his shadow for years. Clearly, though, he's Trump's ultimate favorite as he hangs in a more subtle frame. The golden decor accenting the portrait continues telling the collective story of the portraits and the portrayals of himself that we've discussed. And it's a different story than the last time. Keep in mind as well that these pieces aren't just seen by the media or through our screens. Portraits and decor are typically hung and created with much pomp and circumstance, and are given as almost an award to acclaimed artists in the DC and greater United States area, who have created these esteemed identities behind their work, making it something worthy of a public area. There's something to be said about his condemnation of the arts, lack of attribution, and disrespect to gallery curation, while he's upholding Shutterfly printed pieces of his Truth Social PFP. We've known for years that Trump loves this style of decor. I mean, all you have to do is look at any of his properties. But why didn't he decorate the Oval Office like this in his first term? Here's my theory. As more Americans fall further and further into poverty, this American leader and his oligarchs get richer and richer. He neither cares nor concerns himself with the daily plights of poor Americans. In his imagery, he has crafted his own bubble of American glitz and glam, surrounded by people who convince him their ideas are his own. Puppeteered, his only concern becomes aesthetics. He is content with his display of America, a wealthy, burgeoning country amid our second Gilded Age, a strong military power that intimidates and removes, a nation concerned about upholding controversial figures from our past, not so we may learn not to repeat their mistakes, but to make them again and hope they are more acceptable this time. Regardless of what is actually happening in America, this is the America he has created for himself. Therefore, it is America. If you happen to be 1% of those Americans he cares about. As I was writing this script in my local library, a random woman was accosting a man about her theory that the world is flat, evidenced by conspiracy theories on the internet and personal anecdotes about air travel, which made me realize how absolutely screwed we are. If someone like this, who I can say with 99% certainty voted for Trump, if they voted at all, is out here utilizing our publicly funded spaces while cheering on their destruction, we have officially lost. Class consciousness is such a foreign concept to people, and if that's true, we have almost no hope for the arts. I said almost. You, dear viewer, are what I'm putting my hope in. I hope you make art, whether that's visual art, writing, theater, think pieces, or anything of the sort that pisses off the Trump admin. I hope you find ways out of keywords taken out of research grants. I hope you use malicious compliance. I hope you care. I hope you, like me, want things to get better. I hope you do and make degenerate shit. 'Cause that is so punk rock. And with my final words here, I'd like to make one thing clear. You are not a fascist if you don't like contemporary or modern art. And you are not a fascist for believing that some older techniques and periods and pieces might be better than some contemporary ones. What I would like to encourage, though, is an examination of why you think that. Personal preferences are more than okay, but a line has to be drawn at telling an artist what they can and can't make, especially when those threats are coming from the state with increased threats of destruction of that work. Artists just want their art to be seen. And if you could try to understand why, that would make us super happy. But it's not a requirement. And don't get mad at us if you can't or if you don't like what it stands for, though. All you have to do as the viewer then is move on. I hope you find art out there that speaks to you and that no one ever takes that away. And to all my artists out there, don't let them get you down. Keep making that degenerate shit. I know I will. Until next time.
Hi, if you've made it this far, congratulations, you did it. You watched the whole video. Yay! Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to hear me talk more about anything at length in this video, do let me know. The next one I have planned, I'll be talking about the Trump administration's usage of artificially generated images and AI as a whole. But this video in specific has me interested in talking about so many other topics, like the CIA and abstract expressionism, authoritarian art regimes, Dada, the movie industry, and the art of other presidential administrations in America. So if that interests you at all, do please let me know down below. Another thing you can let me know is if you liked this video. You can comment that down below. You can show me by liking and subscribing, by turning on that notification bell, by doing all of the YouTube things to let the algorithm know that you like what I put out and that other people might like what I would put out. It seriously helps the channel. I've been gone for a really long time and I'm a super tiny channel right now, so anything to push me out to the masses would be super appreciated and I'd be so grateful. I really want our comment sections to be a place of discussion and community and camaraderie, and if you are interested in that as well, now is the time to comment down below. Is there anything I missed? Do you want to hear anything else from me? All of that be great to hear down below. I'll be looking through every single one of the comments, so do not hesitate to make your concerns known to me. That being said, if you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Love you guys, for real. This has been a joy to get back into making YouTube videos, and I'm super excited to continue making them in the future, and I hope that you are excited to see that as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one about Trump and AI. Bye!